So with that, I'll let you take over and let's give a warm welcome.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Clement, for generous introduction. It's good to see that still food is the incentive for people to show up in these seminars. Some things haven't changed. And also, Dr. Clement, we have so many connections. We still do not have a single co-authored paper. So that's, again, interesting fact. So I'm Saubhagya Rathore. I'm a staff scientist at Oak Ridge National Lab. And many of you might not know that DOE labs also do this kind of research. So that's another opportunity for students here to see that these kind of career opportunities also exist in watershed science. And it's a good, and thanks, first of all, thanks also AWI and Dr. Clement for hosting me, Brock for helping with the logistics. It's a very nice day to visit. And we did the most important thing already yesterday by visiting the football stadium and paying tributes to Nick Saban. So now that's off the table. We can discuss science. So I'll talk about our work on how we resolve stream network dynamics, ranging from small order, low order headwater streams all the way to big rivers, and in our large scale watershed models. And I'm using the word stream quite loosely here. By stream, I mean all kinds of channel. So if you look at this image on the background, you will see these channels in landscape comes in all shapes and size. You can have these big rivers, you can have deltas, these small tidal channels, the smaller rivers, low order streams. You can have these, if you see these straight lines, often artificial drainage features. And all these wide range of drainage features play a vital role in shaping landscapes. So before and also let's take a moment just to appreciate how beautiful patterns nature can produce. We often are busy in modeling and measuring them and don't take a time to appreciate these things. Before we dive into the topic, and Dr. Clement has already kind of given an overview. So my undergrad training was in civil engineering and went on to Georgia Tech to pursue graduate studies in coastal hydrogeology, where I developed explicit analytical solutions to predict various aspects of seawater intrusion. And in the study that I've highlighted here, you can see how this, I don't know if you can see this black line, which is this simple analytical solutions can predict very accurately and match with very expensive variable density flow simulations. And my focus was mostly on heterogeneity. And then I moved away from the coast to inland and from below ground to the surface, looking at stream corridor processes and how nutrients get transported in the streams and how they get processed. I use multi-scale river corridor reactive transport model developed by Scott Painter and kind of applied Bayesian inverse modeling and interpret tracer data sets. And in this highlighted study, we basically did a synthetic tracer study, a data worth analysis to explore, can we use a photosensitive tracer. Tracer is a chemical you inject in the streams and kind of that stream processes put kind of signatures in that, and then you get the data and try to interpret those signatures. So can we use a tracer or chemical which will decay in the presence of sunlight to separate the effects or contributions of transit storage zones, which traps the solute and release it after some time. They're coming from subsurface and surface because the chemicals that go in subsurface will not be exposed to sunlight, right? And as I moved to transition to a staff scientist, I started looking at watershed scale processes and basically taking systems approach and see how different components of watershed interact and what's the emergent behavior. And here's this study where we looked at effects of artificial drainage in agricultural watershed and effects on surface inundations. And moving forward, at some point, I would like to kind of connect these upland, inland watershed processes with the coastal dynamics and study the system in a single integrated framework. Our ability to study these complex watersheds have been revolutionized by, if you can say, two things. Like now we have bigger and better computers. So every year pretty much a new supercomputer pops up. In US itself, we have almost 175 supercomputers. And these computers are not only hosted by big research institutes like DOE labs, but also educational institutions. And more pervasive than that is mid-sized computers that even small institutes have access to some kind of high-performance computing clusters. In parallel, we also have the surge in public domain data sets. And we are very lucky that agencies here in US have done a tremendous job in providing and collecting these high resolution data sets about ecosystem. And as a hydrologist, we all use USGS data set quite a lot, hydrography data sets, topography data sets, and NASA hosts tons of data sets from hydrology perspective, land cover, or MODIS leaf area index. And then let's say USDA gives us the soil data at high resolution. So these are really, really helpful for us to conduct our research. So powered by this, the question is the distributed hydrology models, which were at some point considered not practical or were not widely used because they were constrained by computational demands or needs, right? They were spatially resolved, and also lack of spatially explicit data sets that can help us parameterize models. But I think now we are reaching to a stage where powered by the advancements in computing, robust parallelizations of model, and availability of these high-resolution data set, we might be there. So Fatici made a remark in 2016 that maybe in foreseeable future, we might be able to use these spatially resolved or fully distributed hydrology models, these process-based models, just by using a priori information. And that might have been a bold remark for the time. But one of our, Soumendra Bhanja, his former postdoc from our group, kind of set out to check, are we already in that future? Like, is the future here? And Soumendra, what he did was he took 6 HUC 12 level watersheds. HUC 12s are basically 50 to 100 kilometer square size watersheds scattered across US, and set up the model characterizing the watershed structure purely using the publicly available a priori information. Data sets, just like I mentioned, hydrography data sets, DEM data sets, soil data sets, that's already out there, right? And what he found was, indeed, without site-specific calibration, you can get the good match. And this new generation of models have enough process complexity that they can ingest these high-resolution data sets and deliver on accuracy. So here's just one example from Soumendra's study, Headwaters of Little Tennessee River. Again, just using a priori information, you can see that he was able to get good match both for discharge, where I think here the yellow line is the field observation and the red line is the model, and same for evapotranspiration. Also now researchers are kind of wanting to model bigger and bigger domain, and this is an example of EndMember where Reed Maxwell group developed fully distributed hydrology model, integrated hydrology model for the whole contiguous US. And this is a map of water table depth that they simulated. Beyond that, now researchers are also asking more and more complex questions, going beyond just streamflow. And here's an example of Szechuan Zhu from Berkeley lab, developed first of its kind model where you have 3D surface-subsurface hydrology with evapotranspiration and 3D reactive transport. And in this case, they were looking at geochemical exports from watershed and how different hydrological drivers control those exports. So as the hydrology modelers and the researchers are asking more and more complex questions and seeking more and more fidelity from these hydrology models, and they want to do it at scale, the first obvious thing, and it's imperative, is we need to resolve streams, channels, and rivers effectively in our models, right? So some of these models, for example, power flow, you can have this grid size of 4 kilometer or 1 kilometer, and then you can have river of that wide, which is not reflecting the reality, right? And why we need to resolve streams? Because these are the dynamic zones of convergence, right? Your water, material, sediments, carbon, nutrient from hill slopes are collected by the streams, same from subsurface, and then streams transport them downstream and also kind of process them as these chemicals move along, right? And these are also kind of pathway of human modification, right? Often water managers will tinker with streams. It's very easy, accessible. You have engineered features like dams and diversions, which are applied to streams and channels. You can also have other engineered features like tile drains and pump stations and detention basins that interact with stream channels, right? So you need to resolve those details as well. You can also see streams as an integrator of natural biogeochemical signals and engineered signals. And I like this analogy, just like in our body, the blood vessels connect different organs, different parts of the body, and the doctor will take this blood sample and look at the parameters and can make inference about your health, right? Similarly, stream ecologists like Ariel will go in the field and collect samples and try to make inference about the watershed health. So to tackle these more complex scientific questions or more ambitious scientific questions that watershed scientists are asking from models that goes beyond streamflow and encompass, let's say, inundation dynamics, connectivity dynamics, and hydrobiogeochemistry, we need a higher fidelity representation of streams in our models. So how do we do that? If we have any distributed hydrology modelers in the room, we know that this is the trade-off, right? To get higher fidelity from topography perspective, you need to go for high resolution mesh, and that comes with computational cost, right? And then we also have these engineered features that often interact with our channels. For example, the pump stations and tile drains. And the engineered features are often small, but they have outsized impact, big impact, because they are designed for efficiency. So how do we represent these in the models? And in our group, depending on the science questions we are addressing, we take this approach of combination of implicit and explicit representation, where the watershed features that are kind of larger than, let's say, 5 to 10 meter scale, we try to represent them explicitly, and you can see there's a channel flow included here, right? And then anything smaller than that, often some of the soil processes and engineered features, we try to come up with some kind of implicit or subgrid representation or phenomenological model. Now the question, and then we, in our group, use ATS framework. It's DOE's watershed modeling, like workhorse for watershed modeling. Just like any other integrated hydrology model, we solve 2D diffuse wave equation in surface, 3D Richards equation in subsurface, and some land cover implications using Priestley-Taylor formulation for evapotranspiration. I will highlight two features of this model. One is it's modular. So for us to be able to add new processes is very easy. It's designed in a way that there are these process kernel trees, and instead of running model under different mode, what we do is we compose model at the level of complexity we want through these process kernel trees. And then whatever science question we have, we answer those. The second feature which I think is very unique, is ATS supports unstructured mesh, but not only unstructured mesh with arbitrary polyhedra, which means that not only if you have just triangles, but you can have multiple types of elements. You can have triangles, pentagons, hexagons, whatever is needed to resolve your features efficiently. So kind of leaning on the unstructured flexible mesh, we came up with this strategy of resolving streams in our large watershed models, what we call is a stream-aligned mixed polyhedral mesh. So it's a fairly simple approach. What we do is wherever we have this mapped stream center line, and we get this from the hydrography data, right? The USGS provides you these flow lines. You can also do by yourself, go in the field and map these. You can do DEM analysis, topographic analysis to get these flow lines. So we put these long quadrilateral elements that sits nicely in these land surface depressions, these streams, and for rest of the domain, we triangulate. And of course, wherever we have confluences of tributaries, we get these pentagons. And there are multiple steps involved. Broadly, what we do is we first discretize flow lines at the desired resolution, and then we create this river corridor polygon. And of course, its width depends on depending on the order, drainage area, whatever criteria you want to use. So the higher order streams will be wider, of course, and as you go upstream, they will be narrower. And then we triangulate rest of the domain, leaving the stream corridor out. And then we define the mesh topology of the stream corridor, and we merge these meshes together. And at the end, what we get is a stream-aligned mixed polyhedral mesh, right? And it's not just trying to resolve topography. It goes beyond that. Now you have access to these stream elements in these watershed models. You can add more details specific to streams. You can change Manning coefficient. You can add hydrobiological processes if you like. And you can also easily post-process some of these stream-specific variables. And this automated workflow is implemented in Watershed workflow, quite not so creative name. And it's a Python workflow, and all you can start with your shapefile, and you can get these meshes. So the question is, well, we're creating these weird meshes, weird-looking distorted meshes. Are we getting out of them what we expect, right? So we do this mesh convergence study, where on the left is stream-aligned mesh. I should have put a kind of a zoomed-in window there. But you might notice that at the valley, we have these long quad elements that we have put to resolve streams. And the next case is what I call as a tin mesh. And tin is triangulated irregular network, or triangle mesh, right? So these two meshes are same. If you just take out quad elements or stream mesh out of it, you get this coarse tin mesh. So in terms of triangles, they're pretty similar. And as you move towards right, you progressively refine these mesh near the river. And at the end, you get what I call as superfine, again, not so creative name, a superfine tin mesh, which is kind of benchmark, right? That's the highest resolution we can possibly get. It took a lot of time and computation power to run that resolution. That's a huge mesh. But we needed that for our benchmarking, right? And then we run our integrated hydrology model, ATS, and compare if we're getting those benefits. So first, let's look at inundations. If you look at exceedance probability of inundations, you will see that the mixed element mesh and the superfine mesh are almost overlapping in the probabilities in inundation, while as you coarsen the mesh, you get more and more inundations, as you would expect, right? The water is not moving efficiently as this river valley is not resolved in your mesh. And then for low flow and high flow, again, the stream-aligned mesh and the superfine mesh are matching pretty well. But as you coarsen it, the coarser mesh gets higher low flows and lower high flows because the watershed is not flashy enough in the coarse mesh. So that's more integrated quantity, right? You can also look at snapshot of inundations, and you can see the inundation patterns in mixed element mesh and superfine mesh are similar. But as you coarsen the mesh, you get these disconnected segments, these pools of stagnated water. So in terms of benefits, I think we are getting the benefit from the stream-aligned mesh, pretty comparable results to a highly refined or superfine mesh. So it's effective. And the next question is it efficient? Is it giving us the benefits? So again, this is a standard mesh convergence study. The CFD people, they are here, might recognize this kind of graph. So what we do is, taking this as a benchmark, we calculate how much all results from all these meshes deviate from this benchmark, and we call it an error, right? So as you would expect, coarse mesh, which is this triangle, right, tin coarse, has higher error, and as you refine mesh, you get lower and lower error. But as you refine mesh, you also increase the computational cost, number of CPU hours, right? So this is a typical mesh convergence study. Same for inundation fractions. However, this stream-aligned mesh sits nicely here, where it's giving you the accuracy of the highly refined mesh at the cost of this coarse mesh. So it is efficient as well in resolving these dynamics. So I'll go through kind of 3 applications, how we leverage this mesh and kind of, let's say, do some science where these distributed hydrology models were considered not practical, not feasible, or underutilized, and what kind of options this meshing has opened us for us, right? And I will not go in too much science details of these applications, but mostly like what kind of, like how it enabled these sciences. So first is stream intermittency, and this work is funded by, Ariel might be here somewhere. So this work is funded by WADE SFA, or Watershed dynamics, and evolution science-focused area project at Oak Ridge National Lab. And we actually have our all-hands meeting next week for this project. And one of the important components of this project is looking at headwater intermittent streams. So what are intermittent streams? These are the streams which only flow seasonally or after the storm, right? And they're everywhere. Even in the wettest part of the world, you will have intermittent or let's say non-perennial streams. And in the US, if you like a number, 60% of the stream miles are actually non-perennial. So that's a huge portion of your drainage network. And they're also not static conduits. And I will borrow a kind of phrase from my colleague, Jesus Gomez-Velez, that streams are not pipes, they're leaky pipes. They're always interacting with the subsurface, right? And as this catchment or watershed goes through the wet and dry cycle, this stream network expands and contracts. So previously, during the wet cycle, the previously dry or disconnected segments get connected to the main stem, and all the material that it has accumulated, it does this disproportionate amount of material export and resulting in a distinct geochemical signal in the river. So therefore, this wetting and drying cycle is very important for processing of nutrients, carbon, and have a strong implications for hydrobiogeochemistry. Therefore, your model should be, if you are interested in watershed hydrobiogeochemistry, your model should be able to resolve these expansion and contraction dynamics. So of course, and I have to say that so far, spatially resolved hydrology models were underutilized or were not considered suitable for this kind of application. And you can imagine that you cannot really resolve those tiny non-perennial streams in your large watershed scale model. But I think the new kind of meshing we have, we can do it. So just going back, this expansion contraction dynamics have been challenging to measure. Back in the days, our empiricist friends will walk in the watershed, go up and down after storm, and see which part of the streams are flowing and not flowing, and it's labor intensive. You only get few data points, and then you also do not get event scale dynamics. But with the advent of some of these new sensors, stick sensors, these are these binary sensors that tell you if the stream is wet or dry, we have started getting more spatially and temporally resolved data sets, and we are starting to get some interesting insights that empiricists are developing. However, from the modeling perspective, most modeling studies have been limited to what we call as a perceptual or phenomenological model. These models are often highly calibrated for the site, and they can give you this one-on-one relation between discharge at the watershed outlet and length of total stream network that is flowing. But again, they're calibrated, they may not give you any mechanistic understanding. And also, you cannot look at event scale dynamics. So I think then the mesh that we have is a very obvious candidate to attempt and look at these dynamics, right? So our study area is East 4 Poplar Creek. It's in Tennessee River Basin, Huck 12 watershed, annual mean discharge about 2 meter cube per second. It has this interesting land cover gradient from city of Oak Ridge, highly urbanized in the headwaters, and as you move downstream, it gets more and more forested. And actually, Oak Ridge National Lab just sits right here, just off the edge. So again, we went ahead and then also we have stream flow record at 2 locations. So we went ahead and applied this meshing, and as you can see in this call out, wherever we have streams, we have these quad elements, these rectangle elements, and they're nicely kind of delineating where you would expect streams, right? So then, of course, just like any other spatially resolved model or distributed model, there's tons of data set that goes into these defining the structure of model. So for subsurface or soil, we get soil data from Surgo that goes in there for geology and glimpse. I have to say, you really have to have a strong quality control or have confidence in these data sets, because often, especially in subsurface, these are sometimes corner scale data sets or global data sets, and they might have a lot of error. Luckily, this watershed was heavily studied for almost 2-3 decades, and there were a lot of local surveys, and we were able to add some site-specific details. 1 meter topography data, and then land cover data from NLCD, MODIS data for land leaf area index. And then all these data sets are pulled together by what I introduced earlier, Watershed workflow. It creates the computational mesh, maps these data sets, and sets up input file for ATS model. And then we get our hydrology model. We do our standard thing, a spin up, and then transient run. And this is what the inundation look like. So I would like to take a focus to the rivers. They do look realistic, right? Compared to what previously the hydrology models were able to get. The inundations are generally confined to where you would expect in the river network, right? In the valley or in the river corridor. And then you also see some expansion and contraction as the storm comes through, right? So I think we can use this model to understand expansion contraction dynamic. But do we have confidence in model first? So we need to evaluate this model first. Again, we are still in the kind of realm of trying not to rely too much on calibration because we want to do numerical experiments, right? So we want to get right answer for right reason. So we don't want to tune parameter just to fit the data. So first we compare with the streamflow, and this is one of the locations. I think it's 5.4 kilometers from the watershed outlet, and you can see we get good match both in the peak flows and also in the recession curve. And I'm only showing 1 year data. We evaluated for almost 6 years. And if you look at compressed metrics, it's a Kling-Gupta efficiency, very commonly used in hydrology. We get good match. So we have confidence in the streamflow prediction, but we were interested in inundation dynamics. So we want to see if model also produce inundations that are kind of agrees with what our empiricist friends see in the field. So we had field observations from Pat Hundren and Matthew Behrens, who are empiricists, about at 50 locations, and a remark that if the stream is perennial or non-perennial. So now we have that, we can track at each of the rectangles in the mesh if when it's inundated and how much water it has. We can do something like this, stream persistency index. What is the probability or what % of the time each segment of the stream will flow? And this is a kind of a temporally compressed, spatially explicit metric that people often use. And of course, when it's 1, we call it a perennial. And if it's less than 1, we call it non-perennial. We compare it with our field observations, and we generally correctly classify more than 80% of perennial segments and almost more than 70% of the non-perennial segments. And I'll say that there are a lot of these locations are intentionally chosen close to the transition point from non-perennial to perennial. So that makes even more impressive for us that some of these transitions the model was able to capture. So we have now some kind of confidence in the model. Let's see what we can study about expansion contraction dynamics.
What's the cross-sectional scale, just for reference?
Let me see.
This y direction and x direction.
So this watershed overall is 75 kilometers square. So I have to do the math. But it's pretty rectangle, so if we just take it's an interesting watershed. So now that we have kind of some confidence in distributed model, we can do some science with it. And again, this is kind of a strong assertion, but I will still say it. That's why I put in quote that it puts us in a realm of we can see everything everywhere all at once in the model, right? So at the top is a time series of discharge. And in the second panel here is at any given point, what is the length of network that is active, right? And of course, we see some seasonal patterns. There's a storm response. And in the dotted line is what is the length of network that is connected to the mainstream. So if you see this animation here, you'll see that the blue is the active network that is expanding and contracting. And then I'll play it again. And then we also have active network that are active, but they're not connected to the main stem. There is some disconnection, right? So you can track these in this time series. Along with this, you can also get some, Dr. Clement will show me an angry face, but some estimate of soil moisture and water table.
And this is the surface soil moisture?
Topsoil, yeah, pretty close to surface, right. Yes, I agree. I think as we go down, there's fractures and all, there's a lot more complexity. So now it opens door for detailed spatio-temporal investigations. So this is one example, again, a time series of active network length in black line, and in dotted line is a contiguously connected active network length, like that's connected to the main stem. And you see, seasonal pattern in wet season. You see this more a greater length of network that's active, and in the dry season it shrinks. It expands, and you also see the storm response. Whenever there's a storm, you see the network expands and contracts, and then also you can look at contributions from different stream orders, right, all the way from stream order 5 to 1, and you can see how these contributions vary seasonally. So you can slice a lot of these data sets and do analysis. Now, we are interested in expansion and contraction, right? So I might have shown that some of these figures where people like to plot stream flow with active network length and kind of develop these synoptic relationships. But the time series that I showed in previous slide, if we just throw it all together to get this relationship, it's very noisy, right? And that's because there's a hysteresis as network expands and contracts. So if you look at this animation, that's a one storm event. The active network length peaks first, right? Your network starts flowing, and the discharge at the watershed outlet peaks later. And you would expect that the signal propagates downstream, right? And for same value of discharge on the rising limb, will have a different active network length than the same discharge on the falling limb, right? That's why you get this noisy relationship. Then the question is, how do we get a meaningful relationship? So what we suggest is, well, now we have access to each event and discharge and active network length for each event. Why not we just plot asynchronous peak discharge for each event and peak active network length? And when we do that, we get much more stronger functional relationship between peak discharge and peak active network length for these storm events. And if you just color it by season, you will see that there's not much seasonal variation in this relationship. And then you, like what people typically do, you fit your nice power law relationship and be happy that you have this nice equation. And then going beyond that, you can also do some numerical experiments. Again, because it's not tied to calibration, you can change some of these properties and still have confidence in the watershed model response. So researchers have been looking at, well, what are the different controls of this expansion, contraction, and intermittency dynamics, meteorology or climate, topography, land cover, permeability, right? And then typically empiricists will collect data from large number of watersheds and try to get signal of how each of these factors are impacting your intermittency, right? It's challenging because often you have confounding variables. You think that in this case you have high permeability soil, but you might also have different land cover and different climate, right? So how do we tease them apart? Complementary to that effort, I think this kind of modeling can allow you to manipulate one feature at a time in a controlled environment and we'll tease these apart. Again, I think these both approaches are important and have to go hand in hand to generate kind of these reliable insights. So this is an example of kind of taking the same watershed, just increasing the topsoil permeability because we can do it in the model, increase it by 10 and see how stream persistency and everything else changes in the model, right? So as you can see, the stream persistency, if you just have to guess, will it increase or decrease, it was not very obvious, and it shows that it is not even uniform in the whole watersheds. In some reaches it increases and some it decreases. But overall, if you see, I should have had legend here, but all these red lines are the reaches that were originally perennial are now non-perennial. So the perennial network length shrunk from 47 kilometers to almost 35 kilometers, decreasing by 25%. And another interesting thing to note here is that often the headwater reaches, their persistency increased, but the reaches downstream of them, kind of second order, their persistency decreased, right? So, and if I have to explain, I'm still pretty much very new results, but if I have to explain, I would say that in the headwater reaches now, water is able to reach the stream before it gets evaporated or lost. So maybe that's why there's an increase in persistency. But for these lower order streams, reaches, maybe the water is flushed out too quickly from the storm, so there's not much left. So there are periods where there's not much, there's no water left for them to receive. So that's an interesting dynamic of how this persistency changes with the permeability. Of course, you can do the same for all other manipulations.
You did it only for the top layer.
Yes, only for the top layer. Yes, I think because that, at least for the storm response, that's what the interflow is kind of controls those dynamics. So here's some kind of tying back to, I'm not keeping time.
10 minutes.
All right, great. I'm just going too fast, I guess. All right, so this is an example of once we were able to resolve streams using that mesh, pretty simple method, we're able to do these kind of, stream intermittency studies, expansion and contraction studies. So this is an example where it opened up a new avenue for distributed models where they were underutilized. So the next example is agricultural drainage. This is from COMPASS GLM project, and DOE loves acronyms. So COMPASS means Coastal Observations and Modeling Processes Across Systems and Scale, and GLM is Great Lakes Modeling. And this project is looking at Great Lakes system, really interesting dynamics of the interaction of lakes, atmosphere, and the land. And one of the tasks is high resolution watershed modeling to get a handle on the water and nutrient exports from the watersheds, which are agriculture dominated. And they have implications for nutrient delivery to Great Lakes and harmful algal blooms. So do we have anyone from Midwest here? Have you seen tile drains? Yes. So for others, in Midwestern region, the terrain is very flat. And when you have flat terrain, it doesn't drain, right? So it's a poorly drained landscape. And the soil is a very fertile clay soil, but it's poorly drained. It has low permeability. So for farmers to be able to grow crops, they need roots that can breathe. So your soil should not be always wet. They should drain. And also your surface should also not be always wet, so they can move machines and everything, right? So what they do is to make farming feasible, they put these agricultural ditches, which are, they just dug these channels around the farms, which can drain the surface. And also below ground, almost at 1 to 2 meter depth, they put these tile drains. Tile drains are perforated pipes or pipe pitch holes sitting at about 1 meter depth. And as soon as water table reaches that elevation, the water basically goes into these tile drains, right? And it's good because now your topsoil is not always wet and then it's well drained. But it has, as like most of the human interventions, some downside. And downside is when farmers apply fertilizers, you have these excess nutrients. Ideally, it will move through soil slowly, and microbes will process it. In this case, it will bypass soil. It will short circuit. It will quickly from topsoil, shallow soil, reach tile drains. Okay, 5 minutes left?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. All right. Awesome. I thought I'm only into 10 minutes into the presentation. Yes. And then it has implications for nutrient transport, right? So how do we resolve these small features in the models? We often, again, the ditches are narrow. We do not know where the tile drains are, and modeling tile pipes and big watershed models is not feasible. Again, we go back to stream aligned mesh. These narrow ditches, as you can see in this mesh, are kind of nicely resolved using this quad mesh. And you can imagine if you're just using triangles, how small of triangles you have to use and how many of them to resolve these ditches, right? And then for tile drain, we adopt an implicit model where instead of modeling individual tile pipes, what we do is we have this spatially distributed sink applied in the subsurface, and we take the water out from the tile layer from subsurface and route it to nearest ditch, which is represented by rectangular layers, just reminding. And this is kind of a very relatively high fidelity representation where you're taking water out and you are putting it back in the surface and let the model do its thing in the surface. And again, when we compare with the field data, we get good match in terms of stream flow. If you look at one-on-one plot or even the exceedance probability plot, if you even look at the compressed metric. And initially surprised, but not surprised, because in this flat, low permeable landscape, the dominant controls are tile drains and ditches. And if you pay enough attention to get them right, you will do fine. And here's I'm basically showing that yes, inundations do look realistic. You can see these narrow ditches, these straight lines that are collecting water from tile drains and surface are nicely, inundated and moving water and draining into this, again, river, which is also represented by these quad elements. And in 3D, you can see they look realistic. And I'll skip this, but what I'm showing here is now you can do this, again, numerical experiments. Get rid of tiles, get rid of ditches, and see how much they have impact on surface inundations, how they impact your water table, right? And then look at some of these, or address some of these, let's say, knowledge gaps in the literature. And one is, do tile drains increase peak flow or decrease peak flow? And empiricists have been kind of reporting conflicting results where they get data from a collection of watersheds, and they see, okay, this watershed is tile drain, this is not, and we see this response. But often, again, confounding factors. You might have other things that are changing. In this case, we can just, in the control environment, we can remove the tiles and see the response. So from the meteorological perspective, what we found is where tiles increase peak flow for small events or when events arrive after a dry period. So this is the aridity index, and this is the event size. So in this space, we see tiles reduce peak flow, and in this space, tile drains increase peak flow. So again, resolving ditches through chord elements, we're able to also map tiles with them and model this agricultural drainage. And the last one is very brief. This is from Southeast Texas Urban Integrated Field Lab. Here we are looking at compound flooding in coastal region. And we are addressing compound flooding, which means fluvial flooding coming from the river, pluvial flooding from rain, and coastal storm surge, right, driven flooding. The challenge here is how do we represent this localized stormwater infrastructure in this Port Arthur and Beaumont urban area in these large basin models. And our approach is, what we do is we develop a coarse scale model for the whole basin, and this is 30,000 kilometers square, and then embed in them a high resolution model of urban area with all these infrastructure modeled, and then we can capture how this compounding flooding unfolds in this urban area, right? So we're capturing those basin scale dynamics and also the small scale infrastructure impacts. And we have implemented all these different infrastructure in the model already. Again, using our stream-aligned mesh, we were able to resolve these canals very nicely in the mesh. It's beautiful when you look at it. And then a lot of this infrastructure actually interact with these canals. So we were able to implement a feature-complete model of stage-based pumps and gate structures and couple them with these canal cells. And then this is an illustration. This illustration of simulation basically tells that the full Neches River Basin model gives us this propagation of fluvial or riverine flooding. And then in the urban area, we can see how nicely those quad elements are resolving these canals and giving us inundations. And kind of we can study how these local infrastructure impact the flooding while also honoring those basin scale dynamics. So take-home messages. First of all, I think we are at the stage where with the advancements in computing and data and advancements in the modeling frameworks, we can use distributed models and in many more applications than initially they were underutilized. And using stream-aligned mesh, we can resolve some of these important features, the ditches, the canals, efficiently in our large watershed models. And that gives us this very reliable inundation and connectivity patterns. And then not only these inundations, we can also add engineered features, stream-specific properties, processes, hydrobiological processes in these stream cells. And then once we have this, we are reaching to a stage where these models with minimal to no calibration and with confidence built with multiple lines of evidence provide us digital test beds to do some numerical experiments that advance process understanding. And that should be it. So thank you for your patience.